So I'd like to welcome everybody to the episode of Building a World of Encounter, Not Confrontation. And we're going to talk today about some of those populations that we know the least about because we are privileged and benefit enough to have homes, to have places to live, to have people to help us out when economics get a little tough. And the population I'm talking about is the homeless. So I'm based in Atlanta. I go back and forth between Atlanta and Hilton Head and other places, but I have the most experience in Atlanta for the last 20 years. And so I was doing some research, and some very recent data on homelessness really sort of startled me. In 2019, there's an organization called Partners for Home, and they did a survey, and they found that there were 3,200 homeless people within the city of Atlanta's only 130 square mile footprint. And Atlanta has just under 6 million people in population. And you know, the homelessness population in Atlanta, and we have other problems other than homelessness, but for now, let's talk about homelessness. It's kind of had its ups and downs. You know, the good news is that the count seems to be down by 25% since between 2015 and 2019, but it actually ticked up a little bit between 2018 and 2019. And so it's an interesting population that we have here, because I think it's not a surprise that 2 out of 3 of those homeless actually suffer from some type of mental illness or substance abuse, probably leading to the fact that they are homeless. But I think people would be really surprised to know how many people are military and veterans. And this stat actually shocked me, that of those people who are of the homeless, 86% are African American people of color. And when I say people of color, I don't mean Asians or Native Americans or other types of Native folks. It's Native African American, 86%. And you'd be shocked to see how many of these unaccompanied youth are also a part of this homelessness. And that speaks a lot to the environments and the family lives that some of these people grow up with. We have those in emergency shelters, we have transitional shelters, and then we have a lot of people that are unsheltered, and a lot of those people are unaccompanied youth. That, again, would shock a lot of people. So today we're going to talk about what it's like to actually encounter a lot of this population firsthand. And I know I did not have a lot of experience with it myself. I grew up in the big city of DC, where I became really desensitized to the homeless population. And you walk by and people are always begging and asking for things, and you just sort of have the blinders on. And I found an organization here in Atlanta that goes out when the temperature goes 30 degrees or below, called 3-0 We Go. And we go out, they went out, and I accompanied them a couple of times to deliver gloves and hats and scarves and socks and to the homeless, to the various places where they typically hang out and tent out, so to speak. And I was amazed, and it was an eye-opening experience for me to see who was there, how they take care of each other, and so much about this population that we don't see and we don't know. And you know, the mentally ill, but the care that they take for one another to say, oh, don't give that to me, let me get Susie because I know she really needs that. And a young middle-aged couple, veteran couple, who had just found themselves homeless and were tenting out in one of these areas, and we're so grateful for the help. And it's just so much you don't see, so much you don't know and don't understand about this population. So that's why I wanted to invite Drew Benton is our guest today. And he runs and created a company called Project Live Love, of which 3-0 We Go, the thing I participated in, is a component of, where their intent is to influence the hearts and minds of individuals with the idea of living love and bringing that message into the culture through the networks, through our actions, and through a lot of different projects. You know, Drew himself is a very interesting character. He volunteered at an organization called Safehouse Outreach. He spent most of his life in outreach and in ministry. And I think that's extraordinarily admirable. So he spent since early 2000s working at volunteering at Safehouse, serving and loving the homeless men and women of Atlanta. Thank you, Drew. And since then he has grown to create this organization, activating over 8,000 individuals to show their love to others, affecting the lives of over 25,000 people in need. And I think it's just a beautiful thing that, Drew, that you're doing. So now I'd like to introduce Drew Benton. Welcome to the show. And thank you so much for joining us. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to this, and what you were trying to achieve?
Sure, absolutely, Don. Thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me share a little bit of thought around this subject. So my journey is, I'll try and give you the very quick version of it, is I grew up in a very traditional ministry home. My dad was a pastor. I actually answered a call to ministry as well, and was a pastor, student pastor for a period of time. And basically kind of got to a place in my personal life and also my spiritual journey that that the way I was approaching my faith was not going to be the way I would continue to approach my faith for the future. Meaning that I looked at the life of Jesus Christ and see a man who was in fact homeless himself, who went from town to town and lived at the mercy of strangers. And at the time for me, I was in a church environment where we literally went around the world in private airplanes, wore tailor-made suits, ate in five-star restaurants. And something about that didn't seem to match up to the Jesus of the Bible. And so I just took a big step back from that traditional ministry role. And so when I did that, I had, at the time, I have a wife, and at that time had one of my two daughters that I currently, so now I have two. So I had a family, and I basically stepped away from my entire career path. At that particular time, I was mentoring under a pastor of a very large church. And basically the idea would be upon completion of that mentorship that I would essentially be launched out as a pastor to another church, probably in the convention, something like that. And so basically, I stepped away from that career path, not really knowing what was next or where that was going to go. I just knew I couldn't keep doing ministry that way. That just wasn't the fit that had been applied to my life, the calling for my life. So as a need to make money, as a need to support my household, my brother invited me to interview for a job for a production agency. This agency did a lot of different live events, and they said, hey, if you'll come to this event and you'll run the spotlight, then we'll give you an interview after that. And if the interview goes well, we'll talk about hiring you on. So I said, okay, cool. I need to make money. So I went down to run a spotlight. Nothing I've ever done before in my life, nothing like that. So I came down and ran the spotlight, and come to find out, the event was the gala for Safehouse Outreach. And Safehouse Outreach, that night I learned about a place that loved God and loved people in a very real way, very hands-on way, where when people were hungry, they were giving out food. When people were thirsty, they were providing drink. When people were naked, they were clothing them. And that, to me, resonated more with me in the direction of that my life would go from there. And so essentially immediately after that night, I actually met the founder of Safehouse, Philip Bray. He invited me to come volunteer at Safehouse. So I came and volunteered. And then after about a few months of that turned into, they hired me part-time. Then a few months after that, they hired me full-time. And then I served at Safehouse for about 3 years, and then left to start Project Live Love. Just a bit of just to put a little bit more to the story. 8 months ago, I'm actually talking to you right now from Safehouse Outreach. 8 months ago, I came back on staff here in addition to my responsibilities with Project Live Love. And I'm serving again here as the Urban Nation Director, which oversees all of the volunteers and all of the different ways that we are involved in the community. So it's kind of funny how some things go full circle. So that's a little bit of my journey. Inside of that, I would say that I think that one of the most pivotal moments for my life that really pulled me into all this was the first night I showed up at Safehouse Outreach. I'm just a white guy from the suburbs. That's the way I grew up, and grew up middle class America. Had no real understanding of extreme poverty or homelessness or any of these things. And so I showed up on this parking lot at the invite of Philip Bray, the founder, and literally the way that we served meals at that time is people would come through a meal line, and then when they would come outside and sit down in chairs, and that's where they would have their meal. And I came on this parking lot, and there was 250 to 300 people experiencing homelessness, chilling out there. And I say it all the time, and I was on homeless man overload. I was just like, what's going on here? I'd never seen anything like this. It just blew me away. And it kind of was like one of those things where you're just like, fish out of water. It's just like, really, I don't know what to do. And as I'm sort of clamoring, looking for a wall or a corner to climb into, I hear this voice say to me, young man, come over here and have a seat. This gentleman named Marlon Martin, a black man from Alabama, recently been released from prison. At that time, I was, 20-something years old. He was in his mid-50s. So we're lifetimes apart, we're worlds apart. The way we grew up is altogether different. But he invites me to come over and sit down. I sit down next to Marlon. And through that conversation, I began to realize Marlon is a man. He's not very different than me. And we began a friendship, and Marlon began to, what I always say is, he humanized homelessness for me. He brought a face, a personality, and that was transformational in my life. To this day, Marlon and I are still friends, but I promise you, had I not have met him that night, I'm not sure I'd still be doing what I do. So that was definitely a catalyst between bumping into Safehouse and then coming onto this campus that kind of drew me into this kind of work, trying to love God and love people.
That's fantastic. I had an experience. You mentioned your experience with this gentleman, and I kind of had a similar experience. It was probably within the same 6 to 12 months that I went out with 3 We Go, where I was in Chicago, and I was still in my mindset. So it must have happened before I went to 3 We Go. I think actually this experience is what prompted me to, when I heard about 3 We Go, because we have some mutual friends, that I said, I want to do this. So I had a business where I traveled a lot, and I had traveled to Chicago. It was a long day. It was the end of the day. I had gotten up early for the flight. I had rented a car to go out to see some clients, and I was returning the rental car and walking back to my hotel in downtown Chicago. I was tired. I was hungry. I was cranky. It was, 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And being from DC and having the experience of being around homeless all the time, that you become desensitized to it. I was walking up a street, after returning the rental car, and I'm going to say probably in his mid 30s, black man with a young boy was at the corner asking people to spare some change, some money, so that they could buy dinner for themselves for the evening. And I just walked right on past, just whatever. And, God works in not so very mysterious ways sometimes, because after a couple of blocks, I realized, oh crap, I'm going in the wrong direction. I got to turn around and go back. And so wouldn't you know it, the light changed right at that corner, and I had to stop and stay there at that corner with them. And so the man, again, reiterated his request to have some help buying dinner for the evening for him and his son. And I, in my irritated, desensitized, DC mode mentality city girl, just looked over him and said, you know, I'm not going to give you money, but if you really want dinner, I'll buy you dinner. And much to my surprise, he said, okay, that would be great. And I said, okay, well, right here we have a Chinese restaurant. Down there we have a McDonald's. Where would you like to go? Or do you have another place? He said, let's go to McDonald's. So that gave us a good 3 blocks to talk. And I could hear his story. And, you know, there are lots of issues that get embroiled in this and my experience here. But the long and the short of it is, I walked 3 blocks with this person while he told me the heartbreaking story of growing up in a disadvantaged neighborhood with disadvantaged environments where he felt the only option for him to make money was to sell drugs. He claims he wasn't a user. Who knows if he was or not? Doesn't matter. He was all clean and sober and, you know, together then. He gets out of prison, gets his son back, and he's trying to get a job and lead a clean life, and he's homeless. And he tried to find a job, and he got a job as a doorman for a hotel group downtown in Chicago. And when his record came back, it showed the felony, and they said, sorry, you're a great employee for the, you know, short period of time we've had you, but we can't risk having somebody with a felony out, you know, representing us at the door. So he lost his job. So he goes down to Chicago every single day from the shelter that's outside of, you know, the city, and puts his kid in school, and then spends the rest of the day trying to find a job so that they can no longer be homeless. And, you know, it just really called to me the difficulty that people get into that becomes such a cycle, and such a difficult cycle to break out of if you don't have something seriously supporting you and really helping you. You know, after I bought them dinner at McDonald's, I offered to buy them, you know, more food. They said, no, we don't have any place to keep it, so it doesn't do us any good. Can I buy something for your boy? Does he need new shoes? He's a growing kid of 8 years old, new clothes, new shoes, whatever. He said, no, you know, actually I was just able to get him some things. So, you know, he didn't take anything more than what he absolutely needed in that moment. And it really humanized not only the homelessness population, but a lot of those who have come out of jail or other environments where they're trying to make themselves a better life, but just simply don't have the support mechanisms and have so much working against them. And, you know, so what you're doing with your organization, tell us a little bit more about how you are trying to help these people who oftentimes find themselves in this continual cycle that's hard to break out of.
Sure. So here at Safehouse, I'll go through that first, and then I'll talk about maybe some of the additional things we're doing through Project Live Love as well. We kind of take a multi-tiered approach. So the sort of bottom rung of the ladder, if you will, or if you, we actually put it into a visual image of a triangle, and then you have like various layers of that triangle. So a pyramid, if you will. We like to call it the pyramid of self-sufficiency. The sort of bottom layer of that, we used to do a funnel, but who wants to go down the drain? So now it's a pyramid.
I like that. Visuals are important.
Yeah, it's like, well, let's flip this around. This seems better, you know. So the bottom layer is what we call our impact meals. This is where we meet that basic need of food. Everybody's hungry. We're all human. We all eat. We are, you know, that's just a natural piece of who we are. And so the folks that we serve, they come in the door. Well, we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, in a little bit as far as how COVID-19's affected everything. But the people we serve, we serve a meal, and it's our opportunity to get to know them, learn their names, learn their stories, and find out how we can really help. It's a relationship. It doesn't, you know, homelessness is not a one-size-fits-all solution. So it's definitely a high relational, to help people, you have to really, really establish that relationship from the get-go. And it's only through doing that. So for example, we'll have people that have come here for months. We've had people that come here for years that have never taken advantage of the additional services we provide because they haven't really connected with somebody on a staff or volunteer basis. And that relationship's paramount. It really is. It's amazing how we'll have people come here for years and then all of a sudden they connect really well with somebody, and boom, they're able to get through self-sufficiency. So kind of the next step is what we call problem solvers. So on top of the meals, you have problem solvers, and through problem solvers, we can do a whole variety of different things to help people. These are meeting all kinds of basic needs, everything from maybe you need to get a hygiene kit so you can brush your teeth or put on some deodorant. Maybe you want to get your birth certificate or your social security card. If you think about it, if you're living on the streets, everything you own is on your person or it's in your bag or your purse. You know, if you're a lady, or you're maybe in a wallet kind of thing. So what happens all too often is people are robbed. People are mugged, and all of their stuff gets stolen. So, you know, a lot of times we look at people on the streets and we think, well, they just need to go get a job. You know, that guy's lazy. He just needs to go work. Well, think about it. What's the first thing they ask you for whenever you get a job? They ask you for 2 forms of identification. So
and an address.
And an address. Absolutely. Yeah. So if you don't have an ID and you don't have a birth certificate or a social security card, then you're unemployable. Mm. And so we help people navigate through those pieces, help them get to where they can become job ready. There's a whole lot more things to what happens in problem solvers, everything from people using the telephone, connecting folks to rehabs, to we send people home on bus tickets all the time. So people that have come to Atlanta, maybe you came to stay with your boyfriend and you were staying at his house and maybe things didn't work out, and next thing you know, you found yourself out on the streets. You can come to Safehouse, and we send people home left and right. We've been doing a lot of that here recently, which has been very exciting. So that's kind of the stair step number 2. Also in tandem with that stair step is a thing we have called Atlanta Guardian. And Atlanta Guardian is essentially problem solvers, but away from Safehouse. They go out at night from about 11 o'clock until sometime early off in the morning, and try and find people that are living in their cars, people that are living under bridgeways, people that are what we call provider resistant. So they're not coming into Safehouse. They won't come to Safehouse for whatever their reasoning. Maybe they don't want to be a part of the crowds. They maybe feel intimidated. So we're going to them. The next stair step is our career development program. And it's through this program that we're now really, really starting to move people up the rungs, up the ladder. So they've already got their ID, they're employable. As soon as they come into a career development program, we have housing that we connect them into, so they go straight into housing. So they have a place where they can shower in the morning, they can prepare their breakfast, pack their lunch to go to work. And then we help them through a series of job readiness trainings. We have various workshops that we put them through. They come in and then they work at Safehouse 3 days a week, doing various tasks, different projects. Some of them are campus beautification. Some of it, frankly, it's janitorial work. So pieces of it are, but it gives us an opportunity to observe them firsthand to see how they work. And then our career development director is able to then speak with, having observed how they work, she can then serve as a reference to connecting them into jobs. And additionally, she does go out and proactively gets job listings that she, through various partners of Safehouse, that we're able to connect people on into. So that's kind of what that looks like. And essentially, once you graduate the career development program, we'll help you navigate. Once you get we teach them budgeting, how to deal with their finances. And so once they graduate, then we help them move from there into permanent housing. So out of temporary housing, off into permanent housing. And at that point, people are really, really, really on the path to self-sufficiency. Do some of them fall down? Yes. And do we help them get back up? Yes. So some of that, there's a little bit, like I said, it's all relationships. It's not that there's no one size fits all. In addition to all of those things, I'll just quickly speak as well about Project Live Love. Is through that organization, we focus on 2 things. One, during the winter months, we do our Free Oh We Go program, which is where we see it as a homeless rescue program. So where we come out and try to meet people at a point of a critical need. having done that program over the years, there have been, I think it's like 72 different, for instances of where if we wouldn't have shown up, these people might not have made it through the night. And that's no joke. There was one guy in particular that when he showed up, he had urinated on himself. You could tell he was out of his mind. It was like 17 degrees outside, and I'm telling you what, he had on a t-shirt and a pair of pants that, again, he had urinated on. So I'm sure that was freezing on his body. And so we were able to wrap him up in blankets, put a hat on him. One of our volunteers took her jacket off and put her jacket on the man. We put some gloves on him and was able to help him, give him some warmth and safety for the night. And then lastly is about Project Live Love is we do various health day events throughout the year. So where we block the street downtown Atlanta, bring in a lot of different doctors, service providers. We do STD testing. We bring in chiropractors. Everybody gets a hygiene kit. It's a whole bunch of different things that we do to try and help people from a health perspective.
Mm-hmm. That sounds wonderful. And, a couple of things that you said that really stuck out in my head is, especially when we talk about the misconceptions that people have about the homeless, just go get a job, or that they're criminals, or that they're lazy. And one of the things that you mentioned that I hadn't even thought about is, with respect to crime, is that not only are they not always the criminals, they are the victims of crime. And so because they don't have an ability to protect themselves or their stuff, especially if they're not a big, tall, strong, muscular man, that they can be stolen from. Money, IDs, all of that kind of stuff. And like you pointed out, if you don't have an ID, you are totally messed with in terms of trying to get a job or anything like that. And, costs money to get those things replaced. And it becomes a vicious cycle. If you don't have an ID to get a job, to get money, you can't get the money to get the ID, chicken and egg. And I think that's a great misconception to clear up for a lot of people, that the homelessness are not the ones creating a lot of the crime. They are the victims of crime. And, another thing too is, I thought about is the high mental illness component of those people that are in homeless. If they don't have the money for stabilizing medications, then again, that begins that cycle. And I have a good friend whose mother was in that grouping where, we talk a lot about mental illness in a lot of areas, whether it's gun control or homelessness or whatever. And her mom was in one of these in-between stage of folks. They weren't so severe that they need to be institutionalized, but they had enough problems that they needed regular medication to function well. And so they needed somebody to either provide them that medication, make sure they were taking that medication, and needed to live in like these kind of in-between supervised environments like group homes, which have not been regulated and are all over the place in terms of their quality, and simply are not that many of them available either. So there is such a cycle of so hard to break out of that once you get into it. And, you brought up another thing too is, a lot of times cities will pass laws against panhandling and homelessness, and where you can congregate or camp out and what I think underlies that is sort of a shame that the city has of the homeless. But yet you mentioned that the homeless themselves often feel shame about coming and getting help as well. And so one of the things that we want to do is remove that label of shame and of judgment and of these preconceived notions. I'd like to hear more about how your own preconceived notions and how others that you have seen have preconceived notions, how those were disabused once you started creating these personal relationships. Because I love the fact that you are focusing on that, because it is not only a relationship that builds trust, but it's a humanizing. You see them as individuals, not just as this vacant, void, homeless entity that you don't, put any heart into.
Sure. And then I'll answer that question, and then I also want to touch on the labeling thing as well, just in a minute. Uh,
Yeah, great.
so um, I guess, when you grow up in the suburban environment, for me, the only real context for homelessness was what you see on television or in a movie, which is almost always, it's usually a white man with a big beard and, a sock hat on and a shopping cart and the whole shebang, and it's full of all kinds of bags of stuff and all that. And maybe it's a white lady. I think about Home Alone 2, and it's funny how those are the images that I grew up with. These are the people that I thought of when I thought of people living on the streets. And so that definitely, that wall crumbled the night I met Marlon. I mean, it really did. It was one of those things where for me, it didn't take 10 years or a year of working with people to have these walls fall. It fell fast because I had an aha moment, if you will. It was a very catalytic aha moment.
And it was in your face too. I mean, you didn't have any choice.
Right. Because I met somebody dealing with this, which is totally different than what you see on a TV screen. It was
driving by or walking by where you don't have to pay any attention to them.
That's correct. Because the only other context I had for seeing people on the streets was going to the Braves games. And similar to your experience that you had whenever you were walking past that group or past that gentleman asking for money in Chicago, that's what we did. It was like, hey, there's people asking for money. Walk faster, or let's cross the street. Let's go to the other side, because we just didn't know any better. That's just the way we grew up. And we didn't take the time to say, hey, man, what's your name? What's your story? Now let me see if I can help you. We just, we were eager to get to the Braves game or get home at the end of the night, whatever that looked like. So those are my only real context for experiencing people living on the streets. So, like I say, all that sort of crumbled the night I met Marlon and has continued to fall down ever since. At this point now, I've been doing this work for almost 15 years. And so every story, every person you meet kind of opens up a new piece of understanding that you didn't have previously. And that's why I always say that homelessness is as various as the colors of the rainbow, because that it is. There's no one story, and I've already said that earlier. Talking about the labels piece for a second is one thing that we're trying to do at Safehouse is we're trying to eradicate the term homeless. And what I mean by that, and in our conversation, we both have probably said it 50 times, and that's the way it is. But what we're trying to move to is we're trying to move the culture to a place of saying people experiencing homelessness or homelessness, instead of applying the label of homeless to an individual.
I love that.
From the standpoint, because if it gets in their head that they are homeless, that does something to your psyche. It changes your perspective of living.
Yep.
You being a person living in homelessness is different than being a homeless person.
Or having homeless as your identity. You are so right on that front.
That's exactly right. And so we're trying to move away from we're trying not to let people take on that identity. That's exactly right.
Beautiful.
And so, and that permeates into how we as the staff, the volunteers, how we all, from a language perspective, how we say things. And so that labeling piece is definitely something we are trying to move away from. So the terms we use are things like homelessness, people living on the streets. We've kind of come up with some different, substitutes from using homeless, although that word it's prolific throughout our culture. It's going to be a really hard time to get rid of that. But you're starting to see that apply to other areas of our culture as well. So for example, people are starting to say people dealing with bulimia or people dealing with depression, or versus saying a bulimic.
Yes.
because it just reframes the term to where it's not something that somebody's going to wear around. It's something that they're dealing with as a thing, like an alcoholic versus someone who's dealing with alcoholism.
I love that.
Just a different perspective.
Yeah, I teach ego classes and about how to manage your ego and identifying with emotions. I am angry. No, you are experiencing the emotional energy of anger running through you so that you don't become identified with it and become an angry person. So I couldn't be more on your side with this. I think that is absolutely an element of our psyche that I think is just critical. And I'm just thrilled jumping up and down in my own head right now that you guys are taking that approach.
Yeah, it's funny. It'll take time. I mean, even here at Safehouse, it takes time for our staff, our volunteers and it's funny because we'll catch ourselves. We'll be like, hey, I was talking to this guy experiencing homelessness the other day, and it's like, so it'll take time, for us to make that cultural shift, but that's something we're trying.
Yeah, beautiful. So I want to ask you now, you've mentioned a couple of times your upbringing being so far removed from this. And I think that obviously part of the psyche that we're talking about here and how people view people suffering from homelessness situations it's because it is so easy and it's so much more comfortable, less uncomfortable to use these labels, to turn a blind eye, to go deaf, dumb, and blind to the circumstances, because it's just easier and it feels better. It's not as uncomfortable. And so given your circumstances and growing up, and I didn't grow up all that differently than you, is how has your family and those closest to you responded to your path and to what you're doing, since it has taken quite a different turn?
Yes. So at first, being that I'm a pastor's kid, when I stepped away from the traditional ministry, that was met with a little bit of like, what are you doing? And then when that rolled into, well, what I am going to do is I'm going to work in downtown Atlanta with people on the streets. Initially, there was a little bit of like a what? And I will say this though, is that turned a curve though pretty quick. And when I say the what, that was meant from I would say my parents and maybe my siblings. Whereas my wife was 100% on board from the beginning. She's always been very supportive of me and my passions, and clearly this had become a passion of mine. So she was ready to go with me down that road, as well as my daughters. They've always embraced this work very much so. And they still, like both of them, I have an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. And they both come and serve with us here at Safehouse from time to time, and they love doing this kind of work. My parents, it was only maybe, 6 months, 8 months into working at Safehouse, and by Christmas of that year, they were down here in the midst of it all as well. And so my family, my parents, my in-laws have fully embraced what we do. My dad comes to all of our events, comes to as many things as he can. He comes to 3 We Go all the time. And so he does whatever he can do to be involved. And it's really neat to see how in his life, again, coming from traditional ministry, which is preaching, teaching, from up here on the pulpit, to the transition of sitting beside somebody playing a game of checkers, or just having lunch together and having a conversation, how that shift has happened in him. It's really, I think it's awesome to watch. I love just sitting back watching my dad at some of these events. It's kind of the cutest thing sometimes. But it's changed all of us though, his perspective has changed through the years. So.
That's wonderful. I'd like to kind of, the last couple of things I want to talk about is, any circumstances that or scenario, like an example that you can think of. You've named a couple for yourself and for your dad, but in this regard of how challenging is it to educate people, and to encounter differing views or the deaf, dumb, and blind perspective about those who are suffering from homelessness right now. How do you approach them, and are there examples that you can give as to how somebody had a preconceived notion that once you were able to get through with them, or they had an experience directly with somebody, that you saw that change and it completely changed their perspective of what they came into it with through that encounter?
So yeah, so I think a good example of that would be is from time to time I'm invited to go speak at different, whether it be companies, schools, churches, whatever these things are, clubs,
podcasts.
yeah, podcasts, business networking groups, whatever they are, whatever it is, And so when people invite me into those environments, like for example, really, like if I go to a school or a church, somewhere where they have a big screen, I walk people through imagery. I'll take them through various pictures of how people live in homelessness. Because what we see in Atlanta, and where you started the podcast with the statistics, what we see here in Atlanta is not what you see in Hickory, North Carolina. It's not what you see in Las Vegas, Nevada. It is similar to what you would see in New York City, or even possibly a little bit similar to what you might see in LA or Chicago. But there are other pockets and facets of our society that it looks altogether very different. I've done work in Las Vegas, I've done work in Hickory, North Carolina, and when I show these pictures of the ones in Hickory in particular, it's all white people. And for the most part, they're veterans. And they're living in tents in the woods, which is different than the urban environment you see here, where people are under bridgeways and, in what we call cat holes, where they're like, maybe they're under an awning way or something like that. So all that to say this is that whenever I begin to share these pictures, I always begin my speeches, my talks by asking a series of questions, which are, first thing I say is, what do homeless people look like?
Mm.
And then you get all that feedback. Oh, they're dirty. They've got a big beard. They push a cart. All those cliche things. Occasionally, you'll get one, and this always happens with the kids. The kids will do this all the time. They look like us, and they're right. You're like, you're right, little kid. That's exactly right. Is you couldn't pick them out of a lineup if you tried. I mean, the thing of it is yes. Do you have these people that are cliche? Yes, but most of the people that we work with, you wouldn't know who they were. You would think they're out here on the street. You might think that's a Georgia State student, or because they have on a backpack, or it could be somebody experiencing homelessness. You don't know. And so you begin to see those light bulbs come on. And I walk them through a lot more than that. I ask them, how old are people experiencing homelessness? Ironically, in the state of Georgia, the largest category of people in homelessness is under the age of 18, children.
Wow.
So you don't really realize that because you don't see that on the streets. Most of those people are in shelter systems, or they're with mom and dad. It's different. You just don't see that as often. Do we see children come through Safehouse? All the time. But it's not as much as you see adults coming through. So I walk people through a lot of those preconceived notions, those questions that my questions are designed to bring out the cliches, to bring out the preconceived notions that we all have. And then I'm able to walk people through, hey, this is the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a lot of like aha moments that happen in that. The biggest aha moments that happen are when people come to Safehouse, when you see it firsthand, like similar to what happened to me, similar to what happened to you in Chicago. Whenever you have that encounter with an individual and they make it real, then you really see a lot of breakthroughs happen, which is that's what turns me on about what I do. That's my most exciting thing. So I started Project Live Love, was to lead more people into having these aha moments a collision with a person that they would have never, ever naturally gone out to connect with.
Yeah.
And watching those transformations occur as a result of that experience.
Yeah, the 3-0 We Go was definitely an eye-opener, because it wasn't just an individual. You know, you spent 2 hours driving around interacting with many people, and you see all different sorts of circumstances that people have found themselves out on the street for one reason or another. And when you see them trying to stay warm in between cardboard boxes and you know, just things that just literally break your heart when you are right there looking at it. And the warmth and community that is really part of the people in that circumstance, where I was just so moved that even though there you could tell that there was some mental challenges in terms of, you know, whatever diagnosis they might have, there was still coming through that the incredible strong human piece of them that says, you know what, I know Susie really needs these socks. Come over here, follow me, please. And I know she's over here. And, you know, that's just, you know, it's gotta have a tug on your heart to where you've got to stop the deaf, dumb, and blind, turning a blind eye to it just because that's easier to continue to perpetuate that view because it makes you feel more comfortable. So now as we're winding down, I would love to share with our listeners and our viewers on YouTube, how can people become more involved? How can people start taking that action of encountering people, of changing the labels and changing the stereotypes and learning and truly hearing and seeing what is the circumstance and the people behind this, and how can they volunteer, give money, whatever, you know, different people are going to want to do different things. How do people, what do you want to leave with people, and how to communicate with you and contact you and get involved?
Absolutely. You know, depending on if people are local to Atlanta or not, I'll kind of walk through two different pieces. You know, universally, globally, anybody can do this here. Is take one step towards changing your perspective. Go meet one person, or just take one step closer to seeing how you can help solve the problem. That's anybody can do that from anywhere. Locally here in Atlanta, if you want to connect with the work that we're doing, you can go to projectlivelove.com. You can learn from there about how you can get connected to 3-0 We Go. Whenever you land on the website, you'll see right up here it says programs. Click that, select 3-0 We Go. From there, you can sign up to receive our alarms. That'll let you know what nights we're going. You can get a text message on your phone. The first 21 people that respond come out with us on those nights that go below freezing. That's a great way to get involved. And again, that's one step. You may just come out and hand out some blankets, keep people warm for the night, just to see it firsthand. That's a good first step. Another thing you can do is go to safehouseoutreach.org. And that's another place you can connect with the work that's happening here in the city. From Safehouse's website, I would say you can make a donation to help support the work that we're doing. I would say of the two, please donate to Safehouse. Project Live Love is fortunate that we have a good several different sources of funding, so we're in good shape there. Not saying Safehouse is hurting. Point being is that I want to support the work here, because I'd be honest with you, just in my career path, I think that I'm probably going to invest the next 20 plus years of my life here at Safehouse. So I would like to see people help support that work at this time. So additionally, from that website, you can find out more about how you can volunteer with us. Currently, that looks like you come to an orientation, there's an application process, and then we will show you all the different ways you can plug in, and so you can start plugging in. Very soon, we'll have a software online where you can go through all those things yourself. There's will be an online orientation, and then from there, you'll be able to select the different volunteer opportunities. So those are both two great locations to connect with. If you ever want to reach out to me directly, My name is Drew, D-R-E-W, and you can just do drew@safehouseoutreach.org or drew@projectlivelove.com. Either one, they all come to me. And I'd love to hear from you. If you've got a group that wants to get involved, maybe you represent a church group, a business, a club, a school, and you want to come and serve alongside of us, we have group opportunities, we have individual opportunities. We'd love for you to plug into the work that we're doing.
Fantastic. And, with this podcast, I'll also be using this as a basis to write an article in the blog that I'll also be posting in a lot of places. So I'll include those links, as well as in the video that we'll post on YouTube for this series. I'll also put the links down there for people to click on as well. And so, Drew, this was incredibly enlightening, and I love what you guys are doing. It is incredibly important, and you are, and your organizations are fantastic examples of how to build a world of encounter, not confrontation, and dropping the labels and seeing the people and the humans behind all of those thems that we think we see out there. So thank you so much for joining us and for enlightening us.
Absolutely, Don. Thanks for letting me be a part of it. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And stay tuned for our subsequent episodes for building a world of encounter, not confrontation. And we'll soon be hearing from a founder of a group that helps to recruit and support those leaving hate groups, with Life After Hate. So I hope you'll join us for that. And thank you for joining us here with Drew and his organizations on those suffering from homelessness situations, which hopefully are temporary. Thanks, everybody.